Let's once again talk about one of my favorite topics, the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, or as I sometimes call it, the Federal Death Administration. Because I think a lot of people in America's political class, both politicians and commentators and activist types, a lot of people have taken the wrong lessons from the COVID-19 pandemic. And one of those people would be our good friend Charlie Kirk over here. Mr. Capitalism, Mr. Free Markets, once upon a time. Charlie Kirk. This is what he tweeted the other day. As you can see, this tweet has 28,000 likes, over 12,000 reposts. That's what they're called these days. Charlie Kirk says the FDA has now endorsed treating COVID with ivermectin. Have they, though? Have they? You know, I tried looking into this myself, and I could not find any articles or press releases from the FDA talking about this. And even here on Twitter, or now it's called X these days, they added some community notes saying that the FDA has not endorsed or authorized ivermectin for use as a treatment for COVID-19. Oops. But Charlie goes on to say, the FDA has blood on its hands. Blood on its hands. And I agree in a large sense. Although I think he's right for the wrong reasons. You know, especially when talking about COVID. I think the FDA has blood on its hands for doing stuff like not approving and greenlighting stuff like the COVID mRNA vaccine much sooner than they did, which was in around December of 2020. Not to mention all the other treatments and all of the at-home COVID testing kits that the FDA stalled and held up. I look at a situation like that and I think to myself, how many more people would be alive today if they had access to all of these wonderful products? Vaccines, monoclonal antibody treatments, remdesivir, at-home testing kits may have helped limit the spread a little bit. But Cheesy Charlie over here thinks it's all about ivermectin, folks.
Oh, you absolutely suck!
Charlie asks how many Americans senselessly died because of big medicine. Ooh! Accidentally hit my microphone that time. How many Americans senselessly died because big medicine? I guess big pharma is not a cool word anymore. Big medicine called this cheap, readily available Nobel Prize winning medicine horse-paste. And is this true? Think about what ivermectin is. Who makes ivermectin? Aren't big medicine companies, so to speak, making drugs like ivermectin? Aren't some of these manufacturers, I think one of these manufacturers is Merck. They put out a press statement back in 2021, and I do not think they have since reversed this, but you would think if this were true, if ivermectin were an effective treatment for COVID-19 and much lower cost, you would think that the manufacturers of ivermectin would be out here saying, wait a minute. You guys don't need these monoclonal antibody treatments, remdesivir, and vaccines and all that stuff. If you don't want it, we have a cheap alternative. It's called ivermectin. It's rather cheap. Why don't you give ivermectin a try? But from what I can tell, the manufacturers of ivermectin are even saying that there is no scientific basis for a potential therapeutic effect against COVID-19 from clinical trial studies. Not to mention, as I've said before, I think a lot of this anti-vaccine, anti-mRNA rhetoric, I think it's going to age like sour milk as we go along, especially when I read reports like this from CNN from May that reports that an mRNA vaccine has shown promise when fighting pancreatic cancer. And imagine the more mRNA technology is applied, especially to horrible diseases like cancer, and in the future, Americans are living longer, living healthier lives, enjoying life more thanks in part, if not in large part, to mRNA technology. I imagine in 10 to 20 years, people are going to look back at this period of time and all this anti-mRNA rhetoric and all of this hysteria, all of these goofballs trying to blame Monday Night Football cancellations on the COVID vaccine. Everyone's going to look back at this period and think, what the hell was everyone thinking? And by the way, this is an ongoing problem. The FDA keeping life-saving, life-improving medications from American consumers. I read this article a few weeks ago on a Twitch stream, but I'm going to bring it back up. This is from the Story, published on July 22nd by Jake Seliger. Says, I am dying of squamous cell carcinoma and the treatments that might save me are just out of reach. Says, Alex Tarbarok writes how when the FDA fails to approve a good drug, people die, but the bodies are buried in an invisible graveyard. And if you read this story, he talks about how none of the treatments currently available to him are working, and I guess he has since lost his tongue. So even if he survives this predicament, he's going to have a lower quality of life. But right here he says, so what might help me? mRNA tumor vaccines. Head and neck squamous cell carcinomas are notoriously treatment resistant, and mRNA vaccines have shown huge promise. Why aren't they happening faster? Because the FDA is slow. There are some trials underway, and although I am trying to enroll, I may be too late since my cancer moves so aggressively. The FDA was loath to approve initial mRNA human trials, even when those trials would have been full of people like me, those who are facing death sentences anyway. You know, I'm starting to think of people like Charlie Kirk and all of these other anti-vax hooligans. Starting to think of them as the my body, my choice conservatives, but only on this issue, only on the issue of the mRNA COVID vaccine. Don't force me to get this vaccine. Okay, I won't. But what about people who might want the COVID mRNA vaccine, especially long before it was approved by with emergency use by the FDA? Again, how many of those people would still be alive today? But also, what about people like this who are reporting that they're not able to get new technology like tumor vaccines that might help save their life, and they're on death's door anyway? Where are the my body, my choice conservatives for people like this? I guess when it comes to mRNA tumor vaccines, the my body, my choice conservatives are all like, and you know, it's not just the conservative. We can imagine a scenario where, say, instead of the FDA keeping people from accessing mRNA tumor vaccines, let's say this was FDA approved, but let's imagine a scenario where someone like this was not getting access to the vaccine because of cost. Let's say this vaccine costs, say, I don't know, $20,000. And instead, he wrote a blog about how unfair the unfettered, unregulated capitalist system in medicine was, to the point where greedy pharmaceutical companies were price gouging him to the point where he cannot afford life-saving medicine. I think we can imagine a scenario where the who's who of Democrat dipshits and their media cheerleaders and left-wing economic fascist and socialist asshats of the world would be talking about how unfair it is that people like this, people who are suffering, don't have access to life-saving medication. But if the FDA is keeping people like this from life-saving medication, then and we even see this. I just saw this the other day. This tweet was brought to my attention. This tweet with over 4,000 likes. A lot of people have this sentiment that insulin manufacturers murder diabetics with price gouging. Keep in mind that one reason why insulin prices have been so high is because the FDA has a history of locking out competitors like biosimilar insulins, as I've talked about before, and also regulations like the Medicaid drug rebate program, which have long distorted drug prices, but especially with insulin. So I think we could easily imagine a scenario where if it were costs that were keeping this guy from accessing life-saving medication, then everyone on the left would be hooting and hollering, shrieking and shrilling about how this guy needs access to medication. But if the FDA is keeping it from his hands, then... But speaking of socialist asshats, there is a little bit of good news on the issue of the FDA. It turns out, I was very surprised to see this. It turns out that America's favorite socialist asshat, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and those who are familiar with my work know that I am no fan of this clown show. She was making a good point about the FDA the other day, but not when it comes to life-saving medication, like mRNA vaccines or insulins, but rather sunscreen, I guess.
About today, we are here to talk about sunscreen, specifically U.S. sunscreen.
Yeah, sunscreen.
And how to fix it. Hello everyone, this is Rep AOC and I'm here with Charlotte Palomino.
I'm a brand owner, but also a licensed esthetician. U.S. sunscreen regulations are not necessarily making us more safe.
Oh, really? Who's been saying this for years?
Or better products.
U.S. sunscreens are far behind the rest of the world. I was in South Korea earlier this year and
South Korea, huh? I'm surprised she was not in North Korea.
it is so clear how far advanced the rest of the world is on sunscreen, and we deserve better here in the U.S.
How does the FDA regulate?
FDA is different than the rest of the world in that we regulate sunscreen as a drug instead of a cosmetic.
As a drug instead of a cosmetic.
Regulated as a drug has far more stringent standards.
Oh, really? Again, keep in mind that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is someone that thinks that we live under Wild West hyper-capitalism.
And so I do think that right now, when we have this no-holds-barred Wild West hyper-capitalism.
Okay, you expect me to believe that load of crap?
And here she's talking about how the FDA keeps Americans from enjoying sunscreen, I guess. Which I believe her, by the way.
Far more testing, far more scientific and clinical
Oh, really?
trials that are required, which is good. We want to make sure that things are safe.
Oh, it's good, huh? I want to make sure everything's... Now, keep in mind, as I've explained before, a lot of these clinical trials are not about safety, but rather about efficacy. Not about safety, but efficacy. And which has led to much higher research and development costs for pharmaceutical companies to get their drugs approved by the beloved FDA. But isn't it also telling that she's all worried about sunscreen rather than, say, drugs that could be life-saving, life-enhancing? No, I guess we got to worry about sunscreen first. I guess if you're suffering from cancer or whatever and there's a life-saving medication that could help keep you alive, I guess you got to take a backseat to people who might want to enjoy a day at the beach a little more than with the sunscreen that they currently use. But you know what? I guess good for AOC. I'll take this over nothing. It's nice that someone as prominent as AOC is recognizing the pernicious impact of FDA regulations, but there's a big part of me that wishes she would maybe get her priorities straight. At least focus a little more on the pernicious impact on drugs and pharmaceuticals rather than cosmetics like sunscreen. And I think I mentioned my body, my choice. Yeah, I mentioned my body, my choice. And a lot of people on the left are always crusading on my body, my choice. But again, only on one issue, abortion. And good for them. I'm in agreement with them on that. But yeah, on the right, they're only my body, my choice when it comes to vaccine mandates. The left is only my body, my choice when it comes to abortion prohibition. But if a cancer patient wants to try an mRNA tumor vaccine, then the my body, my choice crusaders across the political spectrum are... Way to go, guys.